Okay, welcome in everybody. This is the College Hoop News Podcast. As usual, I am your host, Tony Patelis, and we are continuing our previews. Tonight we have the Big East, which I'm very excited to talk to Lukas Harkins about. He's going to be joining us in just a sec here. Big East, another successful year last year, Villanova with the national title. And the interesting thing is the Big East looks like it possibly could be down this year. I'm not a believer in that. But we'll get into that soon. Again, Lukas Harkins from Busting Brackets is joining me tonight. A very good friend of mine. I'm sure you're familiar with him. You can find him on Twitter at Hardwire Sports. Correct?
That's correct. Yep.
Lukas, how are you tonight?
Doing good. How are you?
I'm very good. So we're going to get right into it tonight, as we usually do. We're just going to, break down the league real quick. We're going to do some team-by-team previews, some picks at the end. So as I said, kind of in the preview here, Lukas, there's this kind of feel that the league is kind of going to be down this year a little bit. I'm not a believer in that. I think this league is going to be fine. I think when it's all said and done, you're going to see 6 or 7 NCAA bids, and it's going to be business as usual. What is your overall outlook as on the conference heading into this season?
Yeah, I think I can see both sides of that. I think there's very clearly going to be a step down at the 2 spot this year because no one's going to be as good as Xavier was last year. And because of that, I think you're going to see the general perspective is that the league's down, but I think 3 through 9 is stronger. I think there's more balance. I think it's deeper this year. I think there'll be more teams actually on the bubble at the end of the year, but still there's only going to be maybe one top 15 team in the country.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I think you have your Villanovas, you have your Xaviers, who I think, and we're going to talk about it later, are going to be much better than people anticipate. But I think the likes of Marquette and Georgetown and St. John's are going to be taking a big step up this year, possibly. So I think that's where you'll see the league kind of be as good as it has been, possibly in the last few years.
I agree.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so really quick, let's get into our team-by-team previews. Really looking forward to this tonight. So we're going to go in alphabetical order, as we usually do. So up first tonight, we're going to talk about Lucas's favorite team here is Butler. So Butler's coming off another rock-solid year, which seems to kind of be the norm with the Bulldogs. They're really one of the more consistent programs in the country, I'd say the last about dozen years or so. They won 21 games last year. They won an NCAA tournament game again. They lost in the second round to Purdue. Looking at this group coming back this year, I love this backcourt. As we know, Kamar Baldwin's an all-league guy. Paul Jorgensen, one of the more rock-solid players in the conference. I think you'll see Aaron Thompson possibly get some more run this year. Replacing Keelan Martin, obviously going to be tough. Just an outstanding scorer. If there's a guy who I think can maybe boost his scoring and help with that loss this year, I think it's Sean McDermott. Kid can really shoot it. He played well down the stretch last year. He could possibly be the X factor for this team. What are your thoughts on your Bulldogs, Lukas, coming into this season?
Well, I think both Keelan and Tyler Wideman were big losses overall. And I think it's fair to say that's going to be difficult to replace. But also, like from the general perspective of the league, I think that they didn't really lose that much more than a lot of other schools lost too. You look at just about every single team in the conference, and everyone lost at least one key contributor, if not more than that. So I think replacing Keelan and replacing Wideman are going to be very difficult to do. But I like what's coming back. Especially when you consider there aren't that many guys, there aren't many teams in the league that bring back a two-way player like Kamar. You're going to have him in the backcourt every night. He's going to get you 16 to 20 points. He's a lockdown defender. And you already have your at least a tertiary scorer. He might not be the second leading scorer this year, but if Paul Jorgensen's going to get you 10 to 12 a night, that's a solid third scorer in the Big East. So I think it's going to be more balanced offensively this year because I think you're going to see guys like Sean McDermott, as you already mentioned, get maybe double digits. Nate Fowler is a highly efficient inside man. He can score both inside and out, and he's 6'10". I think you can see him get somewhere between 8 and 10 in a bigger role this year. I don't really think Aaron Thompson's going to be a high-volume scorer, but I think he's going to have more time with the ball in his hands with the ability to create instead of just standing in the corner. This season, I think that's going to help his playmaking. I think it's going to help the whole team, which I think has plenty of shooters on the roster.
Right. I feel pretty confident about their backcourt. I don't have many questions there. The front court, though, outside of Nate Fowler, who do you think is going to be seeing some time up in that front court this year?
Well, I mean, at the 4, you're probably going to go a little bit undersized. I'd say Sean McDermott's going to start at the 4 most of the season. And by mid-December, I think that's where Jordan Tucker comes in. He probably backs up McDermott at the 4 and plays some minutes at the 3. But Fowler's going to play 20 minutes, similar to what he played last year. I think Coach Jordan really likes to run a 2 big man lineup where they both pretty much split minutes. I think Wideman played 21 and Fowler played 18 last year. So I think you're going to see similar to that. I think Nate's going to take more minutes, somewhere in 20 to 22, and then Joey Brunk's going to get that backup duty. You didn't really see him play a lot last year. He appeared in 20 games, played 5 minutes a game, but former fringe top 100 recruit out of high school, big body, 6'10", scores in the paint, good rebounder. I think that's the big question mark, because I think you're going to see a similar role out of Nate Fowler in compared to last year, just maybe a little bit more of a focal point on offense. But I think the step is how well does Joey Brunk move in on the bench as opposed to what you're leaving in Wideman in the offseason.
Yeah, and also I wanted to ask you about newcomers. Outside of Jordan Tucker, is there anybody on coming in this year that you think will maybe see some minutes off the bench here for this club?
The 2 recruits coming in are Marquise Hastings and Bryce Golden, who's the brother of Richmond's all-conference Golden. But I think you're going to see not that many minutes out of them overall. They're not the highest-rated recruits, but I think they're prototypical Butler recruits, both outside the top 100. Hastings is more of a wing, small ball, power forward kind of player. And Golden is a true 4. He's 6'10", but he can play. He stretches the floor well. I've seen a lot of people compare his game to that of Andrew Travis. And while I don't think we're going to see a Travis-level freshman year, I think that they're future players more than current players.
Okay. And projection-wise, now don't get mad at me. I have them at 7. But okay. I think they're in that 5 to 7 range. I wouldn't be shocked if they finish 5th or 6th. But I just like Georgetown and Providence a little bit better, so I put them above Butler. Where do you have them projected going to the season?
2 to 9. I have them a little higher than you do. I think they're probably more in the 3 to 6 range, just because I think as to what you said with Providence and Georgetown, I think I'll take Kamar over both Govan and Alpha Diallo at this point, just because of how impactful he is on both ends of the floor, and that he stretches the floor. He can shoot 37% from 3. Now, last year he did not. Last year he was a 33% shooter, and he was, I think, almost a 40% shooter as a freshman. But in both of his first 2 conference seasons, he shot almost exactly 36 to 37%. So I think that's about where he really falls as a shooter, is in that range. And I think that there's just a lot of guys on Butler's roster that you look at and you're like, yeah, they could have a breakout season.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I think they're going to be really balanced, as you said. That's something I definitely like about this roster. And I'll say this: I think the Big East is really, for me, it was one of the more hard conferences to project for preseason projections. I'm sorry.
I can't disagree with you there.
Yeah. Like I said, I could see him finishing 4th. I could see him finishing 7th. It's just those teams in the middle are so jumbled up. All right, so let's move on here. We're going to talk about Creighton next. Blue Jays are coming off a pretty solid season. Again, though, they got hit with the injury bug. 2 years ago, they lost Mo Watson to an ACL. Last year, they lose Martin Crampel, which is a big blow because he was really their only productive guy in that front court. Toby Hegner was okay in my opinion. Looking at this year's group, I feel right off the bat, replacing Marcus Foster and Kyrie Thomas, that's going to be a tall task. You're talking 35 points a game, 9 rebounds, 5 assists. That's just a boatload of production. As I mentioned before, Toby Hegner's gone as well, who was a pretty solid big for them in that front court. There's quite a few players I like on this roster, but but is there any high-level Big East talent on this roster? I'm not sure. As Martin Krampel's coming off an ACL, so you always have to be a little concerned about that. I like Davion Mintz. He's a solid player. I like Jacob Epperson, but I think those type of guys are going to have to take big steps up if they want to, kind of get to where they were last year. They have some interesting newcomers. Connor Cashaw, a transfer. He's a scorer. He can help. Damian Jefferson's another transfer I think can help with this club. How are you feeling about Creighton early on?
I just don't think that. I think you look at the conference as a whole and you see a lot of teams with one or two kind of star players. I don't really see that out of Creighton right now. If Krampel's going to get 15 a game, then that's great. But there's not really anyone I look at the roster and I'm like, yeah, they're going to be that second guy. Right. Is it Mitchell Ballack? Is it Davion Mintz? We don't know yet. We haven't seen those guys. It's a lot of unproven. And I'm not sure I really see them having huge breakout seasons either. I think they're more of like they're a capable starter, but not necessarily an above-average starter.
Yeah, I think for me the guy would probably be Jacob Epperson. I think he's very, very capable. I think he's going to be able to possibly stretch the floor this year, open up the offensive end.
Hey, he didn't miss for last year.
Yes, he did.
I think he was 5 for 5.
Yeah. Right. I think we're kind of on the same page. I just don't see any high-end talent possibly. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a lot of good, solid players on this roster, but who's going to be able to step up? If they get quite a few guys to step up, maybe they can finish close to the top half. But I have them in the 9 spot. I just don't feel great about this club this year.
Yeah, I mean, and also I think part of that is they've kind of gotten a reputation over the last couple of years as a 3-point shooting team, and you lost your 2 best years.
Right.
I mean, both Foster and Thomas were over 4 attempts a game, hitting over 40%, and that's not easy to replace.
Right, and they weren't great defensively last year, and they lose their best defensive player in Kyrie Thomas, who was just phenomenal perimeter defender. So that's going to be tough. Yep. Yeah, I have them at 9. Where do you have them, Lucas?
I also have them at 9.
Okay, so could be a pretty rough year for Creighton.
We're right on.
Yeah. What do you feel about McDermott as a head coach? Are you a fan of his?
I think he does a fine job. I'm not really sure that we haven't seen Creighton really make a run yet, like ever.
Right.
I think that's what's going to have to happen is the next step is not just making the tournament, but doing something when you're there. I think that's the difference between a good head coach and a very good head coach.
Right. I kind of compare them to Providence with Ed Cooley, where, really good coach, but he's really missing is that deep NCAA tournament run.
And I'm not really sure that's not always fair to say that like a single elimination tournament is the difference between a good and a great coach. Sure. But let's not forget that Jay Wright had that reputation for a bunch of years.
Yeah, you're right. He did. All right, so let's move on here. So unfortunately, we're going to have to talk about DePaul for a little bit here. One of the worst high major programs in college basketball. They've been bad for a few decades now. I think they haven't been to an NCAA tournament since 2003, 2004. The last time they won 20 games was 2006, 2007. Now, the good news here is next year's team could be interesting. I know they have a really good recruiting class coming in, so there's a little bit of hope on the horizon. But again, this year, probably going to be another rough year. There's just not much to like about this roster. Eli Kane, really solid player. I thought Max Struss, the D2 transfer, he had a good year last season. Yep. I think Jalen Coleman-Lands, the Illinois transfer, could help out. But I just don't think Dave Leto has a lot to work with this year. I think it's probably going to be another stellar finish for them.
Yeah, a lot.
And I think probably – right, you're right. And Dave Leto probably saved his job with the 2019 class. You never know, but they'll probably keep him for at least another year. Do you see any hope for this team this year?
Not unless Struss has another huge – like he has to take a huge leap.
Right.
Like he got 17 a game last year, and even if he has a 20-plus season, I'm not really sure I can see them out of the bottom 3.
Yeah, it's going to be rough. They just don't do anything well. I mean, just look, their scoring offense is bad. They're very inefficient. They can't shoot the 3. I mean, they don't do anything well. And there's a few in the conference. Right. Their top 3 guys are pretty interesting, but it's just the depth of the roster. It's just not there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have them in the 10 spot.
Yeah, that's just a kind of chalk at this point.
Okay, we can move on now. It's funny that you talk. There's so much in-depth stuff about so many of these teams, and you run into a team like DePaul, and it takes about 2 minutes to break down the roster.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move on here. Georgetown is up next. Hoyas went 15-15 last year. They were 5-13 in conference. I'll say this. For the crappy non-conference schedule they had, they went 5-13 in conference. I thought it was I think it still was a pretty positive year. I thought they showed a lot of promise. They were in a lot of games. They didn't get blown out. They were really competitive. So you see something good was on the horizon at least, and I really think this team has a lot of upside. I think the unfortunate thing was the loss of Marcus Derrickson. If he came back, I could see people having Georgetown in the top 25 if he returned, but that was definitely a tough loss. But you still have Jesse Govan, one of the best bigs in the country. I thought Pat Ewing kind of worked wonders with him in last offseason. I thought he did a great job. Jamarco Pickett and Javon Blair, two guys who I think could be breakout players in this league. They have some very intriguing newcomers, Josh LeBlanc, James Akinjo, Mac McClung, and transfer Greg Malinowski. I think he's going to really help with some perimeter, bring in some perimeter shooting. He's a solid piece. Yeah. So I think they're going to be pretty competitive again. I think they're going to be in the mix for the NCAA tournament if a few things break right. I probably put them in that middle of the pack. I have them finishing 5th. What do you think about Georgetown?
Yeah, I mean, I know you hate it, but I mean, I have them just on the outside looking in a preseason bracketology. I think they're in that category. I think they're going to compete for an NCAA tournament. Bid this year, Derrickson's a big loss. I think Ewing showed a lot of really good signs as a head coach last year. There were a lot of games that they could have won, maybe even should have won last year to put them even higher in the Big East. They have the best big man in the conference now that Delgado's gone. And I think that that's an advantage that is kind of being overlooked in the fact that there aren't that many really good big men in the Big East anymore. Hashim Thabit is not walking through the door to the point where I feel like Govan's could easily get 20 and 10 this year again. I mean, he got 18 and 10 last year. I think he's a versatile big man who can really, really disrupt offenses in the paint just with his size and can really cause problems inside. I'm intrigued about the rising sophomore class, Pickett and Blair, as you mentioned. Georgetown fans will hate me if I don't mention Mac McClung, but I think Kingo is the guy. Top 100 recruit. He does everything on the floor well. And I think they're kind of missing that true lead guard, and I think that's where he can kind of step in because I think Momore's a bigger loss than I think a lot of people are thinking. He was that kind of that distributor that they didn't really have. He averaged almost 4 assists a game last year, and I think that was a little bit underrated.
Yeah, I think Jagan Mosley is another kid in the backcourt that is going to help this year. He had a solid year, didn't put up a ton of production. They're a really good passing team. Georgetown recorded an assist on 65% of their made field goals last season, which was second in the country, I think, behind Michigan State. So that's a positive. I think they're really athletic. I love guys like Blair and Pickett. Defense obviously needs to improve. They gave up 76 a game last year. And as much as I like Pickett and Blair, their efficiency was really poor last year. They got to get better. But you see that from freshmen a lot. So I'm not too worried about that. But if that happens, I think, again, I don't think they're a lock NCAA tournament team or anything like that, but I definitely think they're going to be in the mix.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they need to grow more defensively than anywhere. You mentioned giving up 76 points a game, but they gave up 83 in Big East play.
Wow.
Because I think that's part of it is that they had that weak non-conference schedule, which drove down their points per game. Defensively, they gave a lot of points in conference play. They were worse than the conference in points per game allowed, and that's saying something when Marquette's in the conference.
Absolutely. So I have them at 5. Where do you have them, Lucas?
I have them at 6.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a fair spot. They're one of the teams I've seen kind of everywhere. In the projections, I've seen them as high as 3rd or 4th. I've seen them as low as 7th or 8th. So I think that just shows you, again, as we were talking earlier, it's just a really hard conference to project because so many teams are close.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's move on here. Up next, we have Marquette. Marquette is definitely one of the teams that I think everybody's excited about this coming season. I think they're one of the teams, too, that can take a giant step up. I've seen them as high as number 2 in the conference projections. I have them at number 2. The key for me is their newcomers. I think Ed Morrow, the Nebraska transfer, I think is a perfect fit. I think Joseph Chartney from Fordham, a perfect fit. This team needed better defense. They needed toughness, and I think both of those guys bring that. Chartney, I think that's how you say his last name. He's a phenomenal perimeter defender. Morrow can get on the glass. That's another thing they need to improve on is rebounding. So I think both of those guys are perfect. They're not the most talented transfers you're going to see, but they're perfect fits for this roster. What do you think about Marquette coming into this season?
Going off of your point, I think that you're right on with Morrow and Chartney. I think that the big question still is on paper they're really good fits, but great individual defenders don't always make a great defense together. And I think that's what we're going to have to see this year out of Coach Wojo, is that he can design a quality defense. You can have quality defenders, and I think that in a twisted way, losing Rousey helps them defensively.
No, you're right. You're right. No, you're absolutely right.
They're going to have a lot more size in the backcourt because Howard really is. He spent a lot of time. You couldn't really have Rousey and Howard defend a 2-guard because they're both shorter than 6 foot. And that was always a matchup nightmare because neither one was a great defender. And I think Howard will be a better defender this year with the ability to kind of guard without having to deal with it, like both guards dominating. And I think he'll have more freedom offensively to kind of roll, have more opportunities to play off ball because I like Chartney as a playmaker as well. Experience helps, and I think that he has plenty of that, and he's shown that he can at least create for others a little bit. But I'm only concerned. My only real concern with Marquette is coaching. I think the roster is really good. There's enough defensive pieces to definitely improve on that end of the floor. And I think you mentioned incoming players, and I think that their recruiting class, well, not just recruiting class, just their freshmen in general this year, because they have 3 of them, although only one from the 2018 class, can be impactful. I mean, Sam Hauser's brother's coming in, and he is a better recruit out of high school than Sam was. Joey Hauser's a fringe top 100 recruit. Brendan Bailey sat out the last 2 years because of a Mormon mission. He was a top 100 recruit. Versatile wing, 6'8", I think, with the ability to shoot from 3. And then Ike Eke, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. But he is a big body that might be able to see minutes up front. And I think that the inside presence this year will be the most important part. If that's going to be Ed Morrow as a rebounder, if that's going to be Matt Helt as one of the most efficient less than 5 points per game scorers in the country. I think that if we can see them improve up front and improve defensively, they're going to be in really good shape. I also have them second in the conference. As much as I don't want to say that as a Wisconsin fan, I'm going to have to admit it.
It's funny too. Since Wojo's been there, they've regressed on the defensive end. Every year they've gotten kind of worse, which is somewhat surprising. You mentioned the front court. I like their front court a lot. They have a lot of options. Theo John is back. Jamal Cain, Joey Hauser, Sam Hauser. So they're going to have a lot of options. I'm interested to see how Wojo uses those guys and how much time each one gets. So I like this roster a lot. There's no more excuses right now. They have the roster to get to the NCAA tournament. They don't have to be perfect defensively, but they at least have to be, at least average. And I think they should be with the pieces they have.
If you ask a Marquette fan, they have 2 Big East Player of the Year contenders, and I think that's somewhat legitimate. At least Sam Hauser's a 14 points per game scorer last year, but you'd be hard pressed to find a more efficient wing.
Right.
Although I think it's been a little bit understated that Andrew Rousey, although not a great defender, did put up 20 a game last year.
Right.
And for an offense that averaged over 80 points a game and didn't really defend anybody, I think their defense will improve, but I think it's reasonable to kind of question who's going to be the third scorer this year.
Yeah, that's a good question. My guess, it would probably be Chartney. It's probably going to be Hauser, Howard, and Chartney if I had to guess.
I would agree with that too. But there's no proven third. I think you can say that with a lot of teams in the conference that there's maybe there's two scorers right now. But I think you look at a lot of teams and you're like, okay, who's going to be a third guy? And I think with Marquette, there's options there. We just don't know who it's going to be yet.
Right. The same thing I said with the front court. There's so many options. Mm-hmm. I'm excited to see,
deep roster.
Very deep roster, very deep. There's no depth issues on this team this year. Nope. So I'm excited about Marquette. I really am. Like I said, if they can just fix things on the defensive end, they should be a top 3 team in this conference. No problem.
Agreed. And if it's not, it's a danger time for Marquette.
Right. It is. They need it this year. They need to get to the NCAA tournament. I think it would be a huge disappointment if they don't go dancing this year. All right. So me and Lucas both have Marquette at number 2. Up next, we're going to talk about Providence. Providence coming off a pretty solid year again, as we all know. Ed Cooley has turned to this program into one of the more consistent programs in college basketball. They won 21-14. They won 10 Big East games. Got to the NCAA tournament. Unfortunately, they got clipped in the first round. Again, as I said it before, Ed Cooley, one of the best coaches that nobody really talks about. He kind of really flies under the radar. One of the more consistent programs in the country. Only thing they're missing, as I said earlier, is a deep NCAA tournament run. I think that'll really solidify the job that he's done there. So looking at this year's team, I know there's a little bit of concern. Obviously, we've talked about it quite a bit. Perimeter shooting is a concern. Mm-hmm. You lose your point guard in Kyron Cartwright. But there's still a lot to like. Alpha Diallo is a versatile wing. I think if he can improve his perimeter game, he could be one of the more dangerous players in this conference. I know they really like the recruiting class. It's really good. And I think getting Emmett Holt back is huge. It gives him a veteran presence inside to kind of match guys like Nate Watson. I'm sorry?
And he's a bit of a shooter.
Yeah.
He at least showed.
What do you think about the Friars?
Healthy season, he shot almost 35% from 3. And I mean, adding that kind of presence is helpful because I think that's their biggest issue on paper is 3-point shooting. It was an issue last season, and they had an elite creator. Because Cartwright was maybe one of the best playmakers in the conference, and that's okay. And it's okay to be a poor 3-point shooting team, and you have a guy who can create open looks seemingly out of nowhere. And I think that's the issue: is that combined loss of Cartwright and poor returning shooting that worries me. But I still think that's a talented team that should make the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, and like I said, their recruiting class, guys like David Duke and AJ Reeves, I think these guys are going to come right in and be solid contributors.
Agreed.
And then Mekhi Ashton Langford is a kid that he played well early on last year and then kind of just fell off the map. Do you think he kind of gets pushed out of the way with their newcomers in the backcourt, or do you think he's going to get an opportunity this year?
Well, I think both Duke and Reeves are both truly 2 guards. So I think you're going to see a lot of Ashton Langford and Meliak White taking over at that point guard position this year. That was kind of the position battle no one talked about of who was going to play backup point guard last year throughout the year. Ashton Langford got a lot of those minutes early on and then kind of dipped off towards the end of the season. So I think that who's going to be the playmaker at point is going to be between those 2 guys, and you're going to see Duke and Reeves spend a lot of time at the 2.
Okay. And then Nate Watson, he was a kid who started a lot of games last year, but kind of, only played like 13 to 15 minutes per night. He's somebody who showed flashes last year. I think he could possibly be a solid contributor, improve this year, because Emmett Holt can't do it alone. So I think that's going to be a nice little mix in that front court because Emmett Holt's a double-digit scorer. He's going to grab 6 or 7 rebounds a night. So I feel pretty good about their front court. I think they're probably going to be an NCAA tournament team. I have them at 6. Where do you have them, Lucas?
I have them at 5. I think we have Georgetown and Providence swapped.
Swapped, yeah. So I think they're going to be pretty close here. Again, Ed Cooley just he does a great job recruiting. It's a really great fan base down there too. Providence is only 40 minutes from my house, and I usually catch a few games a year, and it's a great atmosphere. It's kind of more like a pro atmosphere than college. It's a lot of locals go to the games, but they sell out their arena almost every night. It's a really good atmosphere. I love going to those games. They do a great job at the Dunk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to be
sure.
the person who's going to say Ed Cooley's not going to make the NCAA tournament.
They always seem to overachieve per se, if that's what you want to call it. But definitely going to be a fun year for Providence. I'm excited about those two newcomers, Reeves and Duke. I think those guys are going to be really good. So let's finish up here. We got a couple more teams to talk about. We're going to talk about Seton Hall next, coming off a 22-12 year NCAA second round where they got knocked off by Kansas. It's going to be somewhat of a new look team, pretty much almost a whole new look team this year. You lose that big three, Delgado, Carrington, Rodriguez. They've got all those guys graduated. Seemed like those guys were in college forever. But with this group, I think it all starts with Miles Powell. Powell's a lethal scorer. I think he's a first-team All-Big East level guy. Now he's going to get a lot more opportunities this year with those guys out of the way. And, with those three guys out of the picture, and then after Powell, there's a lot of question marks. I do like Torian Thompson, the Syracuse transfer. Quincy McKnight comes over from Sacred Heart. He's a solid guard. They're going to need contributions from Miles Cale, who unfortunately didn't really make the improvements I think the staff thought he would in his second year last year. The front court, there's a lot of question marks with Delgado not there. Michael Nezzi's probably going to, play a prominent role, and I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. So Kevin Willard's going to have to really coach up this roster if they want to finish, at least in the middle of the pack. I have them finishing near the bottom. What do you feel about Seton Hall?
Yeah, I have them near the bottom too. I think I think Powell's really good, and I think Cale's going to need to be one of those second or third guys. I think Thompson's going to add that interior presence that they need. I'm concerned about just kind of the true guard play without Carrington and Rodriguez kind of running on the wings. I'm not really sure who's going to be that second or third scorer, similar to what I've said with a couple other programs. Is that I think Powell's going to score, Thompson's going to score, but is Quincy McKnight scoring going to transfer from the Northeast Conference to the Big East? I think that's the question.
Yeah. And I think, obviously rebounding, I think, is going to be a little bit of a concern now that, Angel Delgado's out of the picture. And Torian Thompson, I like Torian Thompson. I think he's going to be a quality scorer. He doesn't rebound. He doesn't get on the glass. So that's something that I think he's going to have to do a better job this year, especially on this roster.
Yeah.
And Kevin Willard, not my favorite coach per se. So, when you have less talent, you need better coaching, and I'm not sure he's a good enough coach to kind of get this team that I think is more of a NIT roster at best into the NCAA tournament discussion.
Yeah, I don't have them in the tournament. I don't think they're going to really necessarily be a bubble team. Even I have them eighth in the conference.
I have them ninth.
I think that's the reason why I have Powell on my preseason second team. I just don't think they're going to be good enough for him to be a first-team player. Because I think he's going to have a big-time year for them to move up the rankings at all.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Cale as a second-year player, though, you never know. He could be that guy.
You never know.
4.5 points a game last year. He just wasn't – if he's a better shooter this year, he's going to get more opportunities for sure. But we'll see.
Yeah. It wouldn't shock me if Powell averages around 20 points a game. It really would, because I think he's going to have to score a ton. Yeah, I think he's going to have to score a ton.
There aren't that many shooters better.
Nope, he's a lethal scorer. I really like that kid. So, all right, so I have Seton Hall at 9. Lucas has Seton Hall at 8. So, probably going to be back towards what they were a few years ago before, the big three came in and got them. I'll have to say this, and I don't want to be negative, but I really thought that group kind of underachieved the last few years. Like, I thought they were, they always were projected to be better than they finished, and I don't know. I just thought they had too much talent.
I saw part of what they could have been against Kansas.
Right, yeah, they did play well.
That felt better than an 8-1 game.
It did definitely. I thought they played well. They got almost pulled it out in the end, but unfortunately they didn't. So, all right. So we're going to talk about St. John's next. So there was a lot of hype heading into last season with St. John's, and they started off the season pretty good. And then Marcus Lovett left school, that whole situation, and then after he left, it kind of went downhill from there. But this season, they have the roster to compete with the top of the league. There's really no excuses. I think this is going to be a big year for the school. It's going to be a big year for Chris Mullen. They got great news a few days ago with Mustafa Haran. He's now eligible, so that's a huge boost. St. John's legit has one of the best backcourts in all of college basketball with Haran, Justin Simon, Shamori Pons. The front court, definitely intriguing. You know, Marvin Clark is rock solid. I think transfer C.D. Kita, who comes in from South Carolina, he's going to be a big body that could possibly start for this team. A kid I really like is L.J. Figueroa. He's a kid from my area. You know, I'm not a big fan of Chris. I'm not a big Chris Mullen guy, but I don't think, like, as I said earlier, there's just no excuses. They have too much talent this year. They should be in the NCAA tournament, barring injuries. So I feel like they're going to be probably in that top 3 or 4. How do you feel about St. John's, Lucas?
Well, I'm lower on St. John's than I think most people are. I think the roster is really good, but the roster was pretty good last year to go 4-14 in the Big East.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a very disappointing year, and I think until we see a year that's encouraging out of Chris Mullen, I can't really say if they're going to be a really good team. I have them 7th in the conference, and I think that's low, but I also don't really trust that they're going to be any better than that yet. Like Pons is really good. Haran's really good.
I think that's fair.
But I think that's the ranking that I feel least confident about is St. John's at 7, because I think they could be I think they could be 8th, they could be 2nd. They're the most, if they put together, they have enough roster to be the first or second best team in the conference. I just don't know if I can trust Coach Mullen to really put together a strong campaign.
No, I think that's perfectly fair. You know, I think some people might think you're crazy or whatever, but you know, they're one of the teams that they're one of these teams that has to prove it, though. You know, they're going to have to, like, I think Marquette is kind of in that same situation where, yes, they have the pieces, but you have to go out and prove it. You have to go out and play defense and whatnot.
And the
you know, Shamori Pons
Marquette's made a tournament.
Right. Like, no, you got you know, if this team doesn't make the NCAA tournament, I think Chris Mullen's job could be in jeopardy. I'll say that.
I agree.
Yeah. You know, I think Shamori Pons is great, but I really think Justin Simon is kind of their most valuable guy. You know, he kind of does everything. He scores, he rebounds, he distributes. He's a versatile defender. I think he's a fantastic player. Are you a big Simon guy?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm intrigued to see if he shoots the ball more this year. He was a highly efficient shooter last year, just didn't attempt it. I barely over 1 a game from 3. And I think that considering there's not a whole lot of shooting coming back, I think that he's going to need to be kind of one of those guys who steps up along the perimeter, because they weren't a great 3-point shooting team last year by any stretch. And I think seeing Simon shoot more and seeing Pons kind of return to what he was as a freshman as a 3-point shooter could be the difference between a bubble team and a surefire NCAA tournament team.
Yeah, they finished 9th in the conference last year with 32% from 3. You know, I think the efficiency issue with Pons was he had to go out and score 30 points a night or 25 points a night. So he was, you know, hucking up a bunch of shots. I think now with guys like Haran around him, he won't have to score as much. So you'll probably see his efficiency numbers go up.
My only problem with that is he didn't shoot any more threes as a sophomore than he did as a freshman. I think that obviously opponents were more keyed in on him without Levette on the floor, but dropping off from 37% to 25% on 14 less 3-point shots, because he was more efficient inside the arc than he was as a freshman last year. So I'm intrigued to see where that goes this year. Is he really a 30% shooter, or is he a 35% shooter? Because I think there's more talent around him this year than last year, to the point where he should be able to get better looks.
Yeah, definitely. I think Haran is, like, getting a guy like Haran in is really impressive. I mean, he's like he's an all Big East guy. He comes right in, and he's going to be a great piece for them this year. So we'll see what happens. St. John's has got to go out and they got to win basketball games, and if they don't get to the NCAA tournament, I think it's going to be a huge disappointment. So let's finish up here. We have two more teams to talk about. Villanova is up next. Just an incredible season again. 36 wins, national champs. It's just incredible. Villanova coming off a national championship. They lose 4 double-digit scores. They lose the National Player of the Year, and they're picked to win the league again. I think Jay Wright has just done an incredible job with this program. I always say, consistency is really the most impressive thing when it comes to college basketball programs. And, Villanova's one of the most consistent programs in the country the last, 10, 12 years. So, and they're really one of the few teams where I kind of just throw out matchups when they play another high-level team because they're going to figure out a way to beat you. They always seem to. I think they did a really good job with this year's group, bringing in some pieces that are going to help. I think Joe Cremo is an excellent add in the backcourt. Javon Quinterly, an elite prospect that will probably come in and take over for Jalen Brunson. They have an excellent set of veterans. Phil Booth is back. Eric Paschal, who people are really excited about as somebody who could maybe even win Player of the Year in the conference. So he's so valuable because he can almost guard any position on the floor. He's very versatile. How do you feel about this Villanova team who lost so much from last year, but still looks like they're the favorite to win the league?
Well, how rare is it that you lose 3 first-round picks? One of them wasn't the National Player of the Year, and you come back and you're going to start 3 seniors. I mean, come on. I mean, they're going to bring Pascal back as a senior. Booth's going to come back as a senior, and then they bring Cremo in as a grad transfer. I mean, that's a lot of experience on the floor at once. And you're going to see, I think, Quinterly is excellent. I think there's probably going to be some learning curve early in that career. But he's going to be surrounded by 2 senior guards in Booth and Cremo who can take some of that burden off their shoulders right away. But I think that they're going to be a really good team. I'm higher on Nova than most people at this point. I have them as a pretty clear top 10 team. I've seen a few people out of the top 10. I just don't think that betting against Jay Wright's a good move. And I think people talk about recruiting classes a lot as having major impacts. And Villanova brings back sophomores who were a part of an awesome recruiting class a year ago and then bring in an awesome recruiting class this year. You put those two together, and that's one of the best underclassmen groups in the country.
Yeah, I really like their sophomore class as well. I think Colin Gillespie is going to be a solid rotation player for them. Dylan Painter is a kid who didn't play last year. I think he could contribute. So there's a lot to like on this roster. And I think Joe Cremo is, I think he's an excellent, excellent basketball player. And, not a lot of people get to see him play at Albany, but I think he's going to prove to the country, what he's capable of. I love that addition. I think it was one of the better grad transfer pickups this offseason.
And both Cosby Roundtree and Jermaine Samuels were top 100 guys last year who didn't really see all that many minutes. Right. I think Cosby Roundtree could easily be a starter this year in the front court. And I think, as you kind of alluded to, I think Cremo fits the system perfectly. He's an awesome guard out of the post. And I think that that's a big factor in Coach Wright's offense. And I think that that's going to make him a versatile playmaker and scorer.
Yeah, and you're not the only person that is high on Villanova. I mean, I have them at number 10 in my preseason poll, and I think they're the clear favorites to win the league. And I think they're on their own tier too. If you wanted to put the conference in tiers, Villanova's all by themselves at the top.
And I don't think we said that last year. I think I think going into last year, we had a pretty good idea as like the top 3 were in whatever order you wanted to put them: Nova, Xavier, and Seton Hall.
Right.
Now, Seton Hall didn't live up to that, but I think that last year there was a better chance of Nova getting knocked off than this year. And it happened last year, but I don't think we're going to see it this time around.
I don't think so either. All right. So we both have them at number 1, so no surprise there. All right, so the final team we're going to talk about tonight is Xavier. 29 wins last year. They got knocked out early, unfortunately, in the NCAA tournament. They lost to Florida State, which I think surprised a lot of people. Travis Steele, this new coach who's coming in, who's replacing Chris Mack, I thought he did a phenomenal job this offseason bringing in some really, really good transfers. It's funny with Xavier, they're one of the teams that I see so many conflicting opinions on. Like I've seen them pick second in the conference. I've seen them as low as sixth. So it's really tough to project this team. I'm in the category with I think they're going to be a top three team in this conference. They certainly have some guys to replace. Obviously, Trayvon Blewett, JP McCura, but I think, like I said, Travis Steele did such a great job filling those holes. Ryan Willage is a really good scorer. Kyle Caslin from Columbia can play. Zach Hankins is a D2 kid that I think is going to play a big role with this team. So I'm definitely intrigued with this group. I absolutely love Najee Marshall. He's going to be a star, in my opinion, in this league. It could be as early as this year. And they have a really good point guard in Quentin Gooden. So they have all the pieces to contend. And I think another thing is Travis Steele was Chris Mack's right-hand guy, so I don't think a new coach is going to be a big adjustment for this team. It's probably going to be closer to the same system as they ran last year. So I like Xavier a lot. I don't know where you are, but what do you think about the Musketeers?
I think there's enough people thinking, like, there's so much uncertainty with where they're going to go that everyone's going to pick them fourth. Like everyone's just like, well, they could be good. They could be bottom half of the conference. I'm going to put them at fourth just to be safe. That's where I have them too. I think Marshall's excellent. I think Gooden's excellent. I have both of them on my preseason second team all conference.
Okay.
I think both of them are really good. And I think part of the discussion about how Marshall's going to be the guy who takes the next step this year has kind of overshadowed the opportunity that Paul Scruggs is going to have this year. He's a 6'3" guard that I think is going to play a lot at the 2 this year. Averaged 5 a game last year off the bench, but he was the highest rated recruit out of the 2017 class for the team by a considerable margin over Najee Marshall. And I think that we're going to see him kind of blossom without Blewett this year and McCura. So I think that he's a big-time player this year. The transfers are going to be huge. It's a lot of questions with the roster, like how's it actually going to flow together? But I think as a whole, there's talent. There's plenty of talent to make it to be a good team.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's kind of scaring some people off with picking this team high in the conference is who they lost. They lost Trayvon Blewett, they lost JP McCura, but again, as we just said, you just have to look at those new additions, and there's a lot to like. And Najee Marshall, I can't say enough. I love him. I think he's great on both ends of the floor. He's going to have to obviously improve, with his offensive game, but he's a kid that I could think could come in this year and be an impact player in the conference.
Yeah, and I also think that the early second round loss last year has kind of overshadowed that they were really, really good last year. And I think they lost a lot, but it's going to take a lot for them to drop from a 29-6 team to like a bubble team. I think they're a tournament team still.
Yeah, me too. I have them finishing third in the conference behind Villanova and Marquette.
I have them at fourth.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think they're going to be absolutely a top 4 team. I think Travis Steele is going to do a pretty good job with this team. So they're one of the teams I'm most intrigued about because I love their newcomers. I love that group that's coming in. So it should be fun. All right, so that's going to wrap it up for our team previews. As usual, we're going to just finish off with some fun picks tonight. So first up, we're going to talk Player of the Year. This is a tough one because I think there's a lot of guys to choose from. I'm going to go with Shamori Pons. If St. John's goes from the bottom of the league to close to the top in that top 3 or 4, I think Pons will have the stats. He'll have enough production to win the award. So I'm going with Shamori Pons. Who are you going with, Lucas?
Okay, so I think there are 4 very clear frontrunners in my opinion, with Howard, Pons, Pascal, and Baldwin as my top 4. And in terms of picking who I think is going to win in the preseason, I'm going off of my personal rankings. This is going to be bias aside. Due to the fact that I have Butler at 3, I have Kamara as my Player of the Year. So I don't think they finished that high without him winning Player of the Year.
No, that's a good point. That's a very good point. And that's not, you're a Butler fan, but that's not a crazy pick. Not at all. Kamara is a fantastic player.
Yeah, I think Pascal's probably the guy that I think is going to surprise people who haven't really followed his career all that much.
Right.
Like he showed when he was at as a freshman when he wasn't with Nova that he can be a high volume scorer. And we've seen him become extremely efficient with Nova, and you put those 2 things together, and that's dangerous. He got 16 a game at Fordham like 4 years ago. he's obviously developed as a player since then.
Yeah, I mean, I think Villanova just had so much talent last year that he kind of just fell by the wayside, and people didn't really realize how good he was. I think that was kind of the story with him. So, newcomer of the year, I'm going to go with Javon Quinterly. I think that's a safe pick.
I agree.
But I think Mustafa Haran, now that he's eligible, he has to be in the mix. I think Ryan Wallage has to be in the mix, but I'm going to go with Quinterly at Villanova.
I'm going to put that in the exact same order, and I might throw Cremo into the mix too.
Yeah, that's another good pick. There's so many guys you could choose from. Breakout player, Najee Marshall. I think that's the guy you got to go with. I think Javon Blair, somebody else you could go. So many ways to go, but I'm going with Najee Marshall.
Yeah, I'm putting Marshall number 1 on my newcomer list. I mean, in my breakout list, he's the one guy I think that is returning who could be an all-conference player.
Right.
I think McDermott's poised for a really big year, but he's not on that level. Like, he's not going to be a second-team all-conference kind of guy, I don't think, but I think Marshall's that kind of player.
Absolutely. All right, well, that's going to wrap it up for tonight's Big East preview. We will be back, I believe, on Thursday. We're going to be doing the Missouri Valley. Josh Betts is going to join me. Lucas, I really appreciate you joining us tonight. You can find Lucas on Twitter at Hardwire Sports. He writes for Busting Brackets, which is a very good website for college basketball. Lucas, thanks so much tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
No problem. We'll be back on Thursday, guys. Thanks for listening tonight, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.